Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending. Appreciate you coming and listening to me speak. My name is Bill Ross. I work in the Product Support Department for Superior Air Parts. Just a quick note about me is I learned to fly when I was 16 years old, and I have an A&P license, an inspection authorization. I've worked as a flight instructor, charter pilot, which flew a lot of piston-powered aircraft. I also worked as a mechanic, worked for another major engine manufacturer in product development, engineering, product support, and analytical. So I've done a lot of condition inspections on engines, analytical reports on engines and things like that as they approach and engines go beyond TBO. Today we're going to talk about TBO, what that means to us as aircraft owners. I also am an aircraft owner, so I know what the pitfalls, some of the expenses, and I also know the joys of owning an aircraft. Today, if anything, hopefully we can give you some foundations for saving a little money as we operate our engines. I have two of my airplanes are beyond TBO, one in hours and one in calendar time, and I can do that safely without any issues. Well, let's jump right in, and I'll try to do this within the allotted time. Today we'll talk about the FAA TBO requirements and what that actually means to us at Part 91. Most of you that are in here, I'm assuming that you're under Part 91 and that you're not flying for hire. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the difference in a new engine, what a rebuilt engine is, because there's a difference. There's also a difference between a rebuilt engine and an overhauled engine. And a lot of people use the terms interchangeably. Also, with the rebuilt engine, folks use the term reman. Have you ever heard that? Reman, reman engines? Reman or remanufactured is actually a slang term and not something that's recognized by the FAA. It's either new, rebuilt, or it's overhauled. We'll talk about a top overhaul and what that means and how that can help us to prolong the engine from a complete teardown. Since major overhaul, SMOH, which we see in a lot of ads, a lot of log books and things like that, we'll talk about what that means versus calendar time. Calendar time on an aircraft engine is just as important as the hours flown. A lot of people take that for granted, but we need to talk about that and understand what calendar time and how it can affect the engine internal health. And it will talk about an engine health assessment, how your mechanic, or if you're doing your own maintenance, if you're a mechanic, how you can assess the engine to see if we can safely go beyond TBO. And then I'll talk briefly about engine failure, some of the, in my experience, the analytical inspections, the work that I've done with the National Transportation Safety Board. I'll talk a little bit about engine failures and what some of those actually are caused by. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics and how mechanics may or may not be the person to work on your particular engine. I'm going to beat up a little bit on mechanics. Do we have any out in the audience? One? Okay. Well, I think I can do that because I are one. I am a mechanic, so I will take the privilege to talk about that and talk about them a little bit. Not in a disrespectful way, but just in a way that we need to clarify whether we have the right person working on our engine. The FAA mandates to manufacturers that they must publish a time before overhaul. That means when the engine acquires a certain amount of time or calendar time, it's time to overhaul, and you must overhaul, or it's recommended that you overhaul. It's based on the number of hours. A lot of times it's between 1,000 and maybe 2,200 hours, depending on the engine. depending on your particular brand of engine, model engine, as to what your TBO is. Somewhere between 1,000 and 22 hours. An engine that is involved in agricultural applications, such as a spray plane, we would expect that TBO to be a little lower because of the exposure that it has to bugs and dust and dirt and smoke and all these things for how they work, and they work very hard. Also, the calendar time on an engine is very important. How much calendar time? That means how long has the engine been sitting? When was the last time that it was overhauled? Typically, most engine manufacturers recommend a 12-year time before overhaul in concert or conjunction with an hour requirement. Manufacturers establish those numbers based on typical maintenance, typical operation. If your engine in your aircraft is being operated outside of those typical normal operation, such as dusty conditions, harsh environments, and things like that, TBO may be used as a guide and not such a hard line. So, most of you in here are under Part 91, and I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. Under Part 119, under Part 121, 125, 129, and 135, those are parts of the regulation in which the TBO requirement is mandatory. If we have a Cessna 402 right here, and we're providing charter, that is, we're flying people from point A to point B in that aircraft, then the time before overhaul, hour requirement, or calendar requirement is a hard line number that must be complied with. The only exception to that is that some companies, through condition inspections of their engine, may be allowed by the FAA, they may be granted a TBO extension. So if they have a TBO of 2,000 hours, and they have shown over and over and over through condition inspection reports that their maintenance practice, their operational practices show no appreciable wear or anything dangerous in the engine, the FAA has the authority to grant a TBO extension, and they may get 2,200 hours, or they may get 2,500 hours, or they may get 2,700 hours, depending on the carrier. But we, under Part 91, that means that we're operating it, our engines, on our own. We're not flying for hire. We're talking about our own personal aircraft. Then we do not, the note says in the reg, we do not have to follow the manufacturer's recommended time and service intervals. So therefore, we can actually go beyond the TBO. And the OEM, the engine manufacturer, is required to give us guidance on instructions for continued airworthiness, manuals, inspection techniques and practices that will let us know whether or not we have a good engine. When the tri-motor or a T6 or an F-16 take off, that's a good time to get a drink of water. So we can go past TBO because we're not for hire. We get those recommendations from the manufacturer and those inspection practices and techniques and inspection guidance in order to assess an engine and give it a health assessment as to whether or not we can continue on. And we'll talk about that. But you're here today, and I'm assuming that possibly some of the people in the crowd are close to TBO or thinking about it or have questions about what I should do when I get there. Questions that I think that we should consider is, what's the calendar time since the overhaul? I've known a lot of owners who look at aircraft. Maybe the aircraft was built in 1965, and they're very excited because the engine only had, the whole airframe and engine only have, I don't know, call it 1,200 hours. That's a low time airframe for a 1965 model aircraft. But the engine only has 1,200 hours too. But the engine's never been overhauled. That's a lot of calendar time for 1,200 hours. I would expect to see some corrosive attack, some detriment to seals and gaskets and perhaps the fuel system, magnetos and things like that if those peripheral items haven't been serviced. So we balance the calendar time versus overhaul. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Oil consumption. What is the oil consumption of the engine? Is it becoming a problem? Do I have persistent oil leaks? You know, if you have to stop for oil before you stop for gas, you probably have a problem. And I think that we need to be very, very, very cognizant of that, and I'll give you some guidance a little later on how to track your oil consumption to look at a change over time to see if you have a problem. Wear material, is it increasing during an oil change? Am I starting to see more particulate in the filter? Is my oil analysis wear materials going up? And then the accessory reliability. You know, believe it or not, accessories, alternators, magnetos, things of that nature can actually cause catastrophic engine failures if those items are not maintained in accordance with manufacturer's instructions, such as magneto overhauls and magneto 500-hour inspections. Gear-driven alternators can and have caused catastrophic engine failures because they weren't maintained properly. And then there's also that peace of mind aspect of overhauling the engine. And that just leads to safety. Only 150 hours since major overhaul. Wow, that seems like a good deal. That seems like a wonderful engine. Something to really look at in trade a plane when I'm looking for an engine, or I'm looking for an aircraft, I should say. But what year was it overhauled? Has the engine been inactive? If it's got 150 hours and it's been sitting for 10 years, that 10-year sedentary activity of the engine can be very detrimental to the internals of the engine. I would expect to see heavy corrosive attack in an engine like that. Does the engine have AD requirements that have not been complied with or that have limited life? Something that you need a mechanic to actually research. Who performed the overhaul? Was it a reputable shop? Are they still in business? Do they have work orders available on the engine? What did they do? What did they change? What were the dimensions? Those are very, very important questions that we have to ask. Here's some typical ads that we see. 4,000 total time, 943 since major overhaul. Look at the one at the bottom, only 1,231 hours total time. It's got whiz-bang ADS-B in and out, G at 1,000, displays, traffic, weather, all the stuff. Really nice airplane. Ask yourself a question when assessing the engine, 1,231 hours since when from a calendar point of view. If it was done 25 years ago, that may not be such a good thing. It may have a lot of corrosive attack. So we have to balance the calendar time against the hours flown. Let's talk about the options that we have when we get to TBO. The most expensive of all options is to purchase a new engine. And if you do that, you take your engine off, you send it to the respective OEM, and they send you a new engine. It's all new parts, all new fit limits. It has 0 time, and it's granted a new serial number or a new birth certificate, if you will. That is the highest price and the most expensive option that we as aircraft owners can do. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just that it does cost a lot of money. And if your core has problems such as a cracked crankshaft or gears or something like that that are not correct, or a cracked case, you may be charged up charges for those items that can't be reclaimed into their rebuilt program. A rebuilt engine is the next option. A rebuilt engine is less expensive than new. It can only be done by the factory, but you do not know the part's history. Let me make sure that I don't confuse people on this because it's very important. When an engine comes to a Continental or Lycoming, and it's an exchange engine, that engine is not rebuilt. That particular engine is not rebuilt. The engine is taken apart. The crankshaft goes to the crankshaft line. The connecting rods go to the connecting rod line. The crankcase goes to the crankcase line. Those parts are inspected. If they can be reclaimed, they are. The logbook for the engine is discarded. So crankshafts go into storage, crankcases go into storage, connecting rods go into storage, all the parts of the engine in different various places around the factory. When an order comes in for a rebuilt engine, they go and they pull parts. Then the engine is assembled. The only drawback that I see from a rebuilt engine is you absolutely don't know the parts history. You don't know how much time is on the crankshaft, how much time is on the connecting rod, or the crankcase. You can be assured that it's been inspected and will meet, fit tolerancing for the rebuilt program, but you will not know that engine's history. And crankshaft could have 2, 3, 4 TBOs. There's no limit on how many TBOs that crankshaft could have gone. It's also a good option because it provides 0 time, and it's given a new birth certificate, okay? So we start at 0 time with it. The next, and I think it's one of the best values out there, is the engine is overhauled. That's when you take your engine, you send it to an overhaul shop, they disassemble the engine, they inspect your engine, your parts. If something is a foul in one of the parts, then it's replaced. But if the parts can be reworked and overhauled, then the engine is reassembled using all new parts, gaskets, things like that, all usually new cylinders, new hardware, bearings, and reassembled with the crankshaft and connecting rods and all these parts being overhauled, rebushed, and everything. And it's put back together, but it's a continued time in service. For example, if I have an engine that has 2,000 hours and I bring it in and I overhaul it, as soon as I overhaul it, how much time does the engine have? 2,000 hours, 0 since major overhaul. And that's what it'll say in the logbook. I'll put in there, I, Bill Ross, certify that I have disassembled and inspected and reassembled this engine in accordance with, and 2,000 hours total time on the engine, 0 since major overhaul. Now, it used to be that the rebuilt option and the new option would affect aircraft value in a more appreciable way than the overhaul. I don't believe that to be the case anymore. I believe if it's done, the overhaul is done by a reputable shop, it's just adds just as much value, if not more, to the value of the airplane. A couple of reasons why is, in my experience, when you're working with a overhaul shop, you're not a serial number. You're part of their family. They give you personalized service and service after the sale. So I like to think of the overhauler as a boutique type operation that really looks after you and provides service after the sale. That's a big deal. It really is. Some of the warranties on the overhauled engines exceed that of an OEM. So again, you have to shop around and see what's best suited for you. A top overhaul is another option that we could do at TBO, provided that our oil analysis is good. We don't have persistent oil leaks. We don't have other major problems lurking in the engine that we've determined by inspection that we don't. But our compressions are falling and we got burned exhaust valves, we got this or that on cylinders. We could top overhaul the engine. That simply means to either remove the cylinders and overhaul them, put them back on, or it could mean that we replace the cylinders. It's also a good time for the mechanic while the cylinders are off to access the cam and lifter interface. It's right there where they can see it, the cylinder's off, so we can tell if we have any appreciable cam wear. lifter spalling and things like that. So a lot can be learned by just doing a top overhaul. The other thing we could do is just patch the engine. Got some oil leaks? Fix those. Maybe do a top overhaul. Maybe just do an overhaul of the carburetor and the magnetos and the alternators, just to keep that periphery accessory gang, keep those in good health. What's the calendar time? What's the hours? That's something else we can do. The other thing that we can do, and the other option we can do, and some people do, is to absolutely do nothing. If we do nothing, you're a mechanic, and you as owners will balance the oil consumption, the inspection data, the performance of the airplane, the reliability, the calendar time, and the hours, all taking all of these things into account. And we may just to continue to fly in the airplane, keep flying the engine. And there's nothing wrong with that if we're operating on Part 91. Doesn't hurt a thing in the world. We can do so safely. The manufacturers have given us guidance for inspections of the engines to continue them in time and service. So, good things to do to get to that point and beyond. Operate the engine regularly. I know that everybody probably says that. A lot of people say, the best thing you can do for your engine is fly it regularly. I don't know about you folks, but I am given by our comptroller at my house, my wife, a given allowance for avgas. And thou shalt not exceed that allowance for avgas. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Of course. We all have a budget that we have to stay within. It'd be great to fly those airplanes more and more and more, but the reality is flying is pretty expensive, and we can't do it maybe as regularly as we thought, but that is important. The other thing is to maintain the engine in accordance with manufacturer's instructions. There's a lot of people out there that they'll tell you, you don't have to do what Continental tells you to do. You don't have to do what Superior tells you to do. You don't have to do what Lycoming tells you to do. Those are just recommendations. And I want you to think about something. Do you think that we at Superior, Continental, or Lycoming just sit around a table and say, well, how can we make mechanics busy? Or how can we cost the owner more money? That's not what we're about. We actually want to cost you less money. That's what we want to do. And by doing what we recommend, we'll save you money. Those people that advocate foregoing that maintenance and not doing that maintenance, I guarantee you that we will beat them to the TBO in total cost of ownership of the engine every time. Think about it if you don't do some item of maintenance. And you decide to sell the airplane, and an owner or a potential owner comes up with a very astute mechanic, and he's looking at all these things that are not done. What do you think is going to happen to the price of the airplane? The offer that's coming your way is going to be or could be reduced. So you're not saving any money by foregoing anything. Maintain in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations is a good ounce of prevention worth that pound of cure, in my opinion. Use manufacturer's instructions for determining whether or not the engine is airworthy and can go on. Do not use what somebody may put on a chat forum or what the line boy thinks of the engine's health. The mechanic is given a set of things that he has to go and check that will tell us whether it's airworthy to continue on. And then, as I sound like a broken record, but the fuel system, the ignition system, and accessory health is also very important in getting there and getting past TBO. Engine failures. Another thing that's a pet peeve of mine is I hear a lot of folks out there talking about, well, we shouldn't do the maintenance because that can lead to an engine failure. And statistically, you could probably do that. In college, when I took statistics, the first book I had to read? How to Lie with Statistics. I can make statistics say anything that I want to say. I really can. You know that. If you have untrained mechanics working on your engine, then you do have some exposures to whether or not maintenance is a dangerous thing. If you have a trained and qualified mechanic that know what they're doing, then maintenance is very low risk, extremely low risk. Let me give you an example. If I find a mechanic who moonlights as a mechanic for my Beechcraft Bonanza, okay? And man, he only charges $300 for an annual. Believe it or not, there are mechanics that do that. And then you start looking at the qualifications of the mechanic. 45 years experience on Boeing 737s for American Airlines. American Airlines doesn't operate Bonanzas. They don't operate any piston aircraft anymore. Make sure that your mechanic speaks your aircraft language. Does he have the training on a Bonanza? Does he have the training on a Continental engine? Does he have the tools and equipment necessary? Yes, he may be a little more expensive, but I promise you in the long run, he's going to save you money. What does it cost to have an engine failure with an airplane sitting out in a field? Okay? So don't skimp on that. Again, fuel and ignition and accessory systems, and I know I sound like a broken record with that, but in my opinion, a lot of the engine failures that I've seen have to do with those systems. It's not likely it's unlikely, and it's very remote, that an engine will just wake up one day and say, you know, the number 3 connecting rod's just tired of being a connecting rod. I think I'll go through the case. It's some catalyst that may set that in motion. And in fact, let's take just one example would be a magneto that has not been serviced and starts to crossfire, causing pre-ignition on a cylinder, burns the piston, pushes all the oil out of the crankcase. Then it starves the connecting rod for oil, and the number 2 rod goes through the case. There's a catalyst that sets that in motion. And again, these things need to be attended to. They need to be looked at and assessed by your mechanic. I'm going to skip through the fuel because I'm kind of running on time here. I think I beat this dead horse enough. A carburetor and delivery system. Make sure that you check for worn components and any airworthiness directive compliance. You'll be surprised at owners that maybe are doing that $300 annual, and they do that year over year over year, and then they take it to a mechanic that doesn't mess around. He's got the tools, he's got the equipment, and then all of a sudden you find out this AD hasn't been complied with, this AD hasn't complied. So now instead of $300, now you're looking at a $12,000 or $15,000 annual maybe that really should have been stretched out over those years, where you as owners could enjoy the safety of the compliance with those airworthiness directives and the safety and reliability of the engine. So we're not saving anything. Also, component removal or change can lead to contamination. We have to be very careful about that. Fuel tank cleanliness, even the hoses. As hoses become deteriorated, that can lead to problems with engines. I've seen people take an engine and maybe go get a factory new, or they get a nice overhauled engine. They put the same old hoses back on. Just rotten, deteriorated hoses that may be breaking down that can lead to an engine failure. Be careful about that stuff too. Ignition systems inspections. I talked about that. Magneto to engine timing must be checked. Just the other day, had a customer a customer that called us on the tech line, had a detonation event. The timing, magneto to engine timing was mistimed and set very advanced. It drifted because they weren't using the specifications set forth by the manufacturer, and caused a problem. Monitor oil consumption rates. That's a good thing to do when we're assessing whether or not we need to look at the internals of the engine. I don't know about you folks, but in our airplanes, I keep a book in each airplane, and I log exactly how much oil and when I add it. You need to do the same thing, because when it comes to annual time, wouldn't it be nice to provide your mechanic with information if you've started to accelerate oil burn. You need to be communicating those things with him. Now, just because you start to burn more oil doesn't mean that the world is ended and the sky is falling. Doesn't mean that it's a cylinder issue. It could be something as simple as an oil cap seal loose on the filler cap. I did an analytical inspection on an engine one time that had an oil starvation event. The mechanic, or the owner of the airplane took his dipstick out and modified it for an experimental airplane, didn't put the O-ring back underneath. The high pressure on top of the engine formed a pressure inside of the crankcase, dumping the oil overboard. Starved the engine for oil. Engines like to have oil. So it doesn't mean necessarily that it's a cylinder problem or that the sky is falling, but I think it's good that we communicate with the mechanic so the mechanic can assess the situation and see whether or not you have a problem. And again, let's go back to that good mechanic, bad mechanic. The bad mechanic, all he knows, and it's locked in our brains, is that oil consumption must be cylinders. We need a top overhaul, $10,000. But the good mechanic, who's a little more expensive, may say, you don't need cylinders. They're fine. I assessed them in accordance with blah, 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 but I did find that your breather was misrouted, that the crankcase nose seal was leaking, that the filler cap seal was loose. And now that's a 50-cent repair, not a $10,000 repair. Remember that. Oil changes can be used as a diagnostic as well by you and your mechanic. If you're doing your own oil changes, anybody doing their own oil changes? We look at the filter, cut the filter, always cut the filter, and what you're really looking for is a change, something that has changed in the filter. More metal than we've seen before for that same hour period. Will we find metal in a aircraft engine, air-cooled aircraft engine? You'll find metal in the filter. In fact, if I washed it into a Petri dish, you'd see something like that, and that's a normal filter. That's a lot of carbon. There's some Scotch-Brite in there. There's some silica, some dirt. Wonder where the dirt came from. Oh, maybe the air filter. Maybe the air box is cracked. Maybe the alternate air door is rigged improperly. Maybe the carburetor heat is rigged improperly. Oil filter inspection, we're looking for changes from the last inspection, okay? We balance that with an oil analysis. Oil analysis are great tools, but they cannot be used as a snapshot. We have to use those over time, and we're looking for changes, relative changes in wear material, okay? Can't use it as a snapshot. Oil, I'm asked all the time about oil. What kind of oil should I use? Approved oils, contact your engine manufacturer or review their bulletins, SIL 99-2 or M-0 for Continental and service letter 1014 for Lycoming. The typical intervals are 25 hours for those equipped with a screen, 50 hours for those equipped with filters, and don't exceed 6 months. Sometimes I have to change my oil in my airplanes before the hours, before I get 50 hours, because I haven't accumulated that in 6 months. Why do we want to do that? Changing the oil, one of the most important things we can do by changing that oil is to replenish the additive package or the additive chemistry that the oil companies put in there. That additive package is corrosion inhibitors. Okay, those things help neutralize acids and things in the oil that can be highly corrosive. And that's why we want to get that stuff out and change the oil. I'm going to beat up on mechanics again just for a minute. You as owners have the right to know who's working on your airplane. Do you have the training specific to my airplane? Do you have the tools and equipment to maintain my airplane? I know AMPs, I know shops that are maintaining retractable gear airplanes that don't have a set of jacks. How can you possibly do a retraction test if you don't have a set of jacks? An inspection authorization. I have an AMP and an inspection authorization. Do you know what I had to do to get the inspection authorization? I had to be an A&P for a given amount of time, and I had to take a written test. Big deal. Just because a guy's got an A&P or IA doesn't mean he's God's gift to your airplane. Ask that question, do you have it? Facility, is the facility clean? If you go in there and you've got to kick a dog and a cat and everything and move everything out of the way before you can even walk in the hangar, he's not my guy or my gal. Make sure that they have calibrated instrumentation, they have the proper test equipment. There's nothing wrong with asking those questions. Nothing wrong at all. So, you as owners, make sure that you adhere to manufacturer's recommendations. I know I sound like a broken record. That's operationally, maintenance related. Ensure that your maintenance provider is qualified. If they are, and they use the manufacturer's instructions for continued airworthiness, there's no reason why you can't fly to TBO and beyond and feel confident that your engine is safe and reliable. If you do that, I promise it will lead to safety and reliability. If somebody tells you something contrary to manufacturer's recommendations, I would ask you to question those things. Question the validity of that. Maybe consult your respective engine manufacturer as to whether or not that's good or bad. Quick note about Superior Air Parts. If you look at our Superior Air Parts homepage at superiораirparts.com, you'll notice in the center there's a link to click and get your free copy of Engine Management 101. Engine Management 101 was, it's a book, there's no charge for it, never has been, that was put together. I put the book together, Superior published it, and the spirit in which we did the book was to dispel a lot of myths out there, try to provide some good information to answer a lot of the questions that we as owners may have. So that's superiораirparts.com, and click on that link and you can download your free copy of Engine Management 101. And if you like it, I'd love for you to drop me a note and tell me that. If you don't like it, I don't want to hear from you. No, I'm just kidding. I want to hear your feedback, honest feedback. So I hope that you would find that helpful. Also at our website, if you have questions about whether or not Superior makes a part for your particular engine, you can click on the eligibility section there and you can search by engine type or part description or part number, even by engine model. There's some pull down menus there, and you can enter the part number if you'd like, and then you see the part and all of the engines that part fits. Also, when you click on a part, you can see the part and everything that's contained within that kit, all the parts in that kit. I thank you so much for your attendance. It looks like